Lena had never felt a winter this cold. Snow covered every inch of her little cabin in the woods, and the sky hung low and gray, as though holding back an endless storm. She'd come here to escape the noise and demands of life, but as the days turned to weeks, loneliness had settled into her like the chill in her bones. Most days she barely spoke a word, with only the crackling fire for company. She spent her hours chopping wood, melting snow for water, and scribbling half-finished thoughts in her journal. She wondered sometimes if the silence would swallow her up entirely, leaving her just as empty as the frozen landscape that stretched out before her. One afternoon, with the sun barely glinting over the horizon, Lena felt an urge to venture beyond the clearing. She wrapped herself in her thickest blanket and pushed through the snow, her boots crunching over the icy surface as she headed toward the edge of the forest. It was a place she hadn't visited in weeks, maybe months, but something within her pulled her there. As she walked deeper into the trees, she caught sight of something unexpected, something green. She froze, hardly able to believe her eyes. Kneeling down, she brushed away a soft layer of snow to reveal a tiny, resilient green sprout pushing up through the icy ground. It was no bigger than her thumbnail, and yet it stood there, alive, defiant against the bitter cold. Lena felt a lump rise in her throat as she stared at the delicate plant. Her fingers, numb from the cold, traced the edges of its leaves. How was it possible for something so fragile to survive in such harsh conditions? She thought of the winter storms, the days of bitter frost and endless snow, and yet here was a tiny speck of life holding on, refusing to be buried. For a long time she stayed kneeling there, feeling something shift deep within her. She remembered her mother's words from long ago, words she hadn't thought of in years. When everything seems dark, sometimes all you need is one small light. Her mother had been gone for years now, but in that moment, Lena felt her presence as if she were right there, kneeling beside her. The sun was beginning to sink lower, casting a soft pink glow over the snow, and Lena realized she didn't feel quite as cold. She pressed her hand to the ground beside the sprout, feeling a faint warmth radiating through her gloves. She could feel her heartbeat slow, calming to match the steady rhythm of the winter around her. In the silence, she sensed something she hadn't felt since coming here. Hope. Over the following days, Lena found herself drawn back to that spot again and again. She cleared the snow around the little sprout, making sure it had room to breathe. She took to sitting beside it each afternoon, sometimes reading, sometimes humming softly to herself, always careful not to disturb its delicate shoots. One evening, as she watched the stars begin to flicker awake in the twilight sky, she realized that her cabin, her own life, had become a garden of sorts, one she had been tending without knowing. Each day spent in solitude, each word scrawled in her journal, was a way of nurturing something deep within herself. Her heart was fragile like that green sprout in the snow, but it was still alive. As the weeks passed, the snow began to melt, and the forest shifted from a frozen white to the muddy browns and greens of early spring. The sprout grew taller, its leaves stretching toward the sunlight. Lena felt her own heart swell with it, feeling the warmth of something long buried within her come to life. One morning, as she sat beside the now blooming wildflower, Lena smiled to herself. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before, that she carried her own seasons within her. Through the long winter of her grief, she had unearthed a part of herself she thought she'd lost. It was her own invincible summer. When Lena finally left the cabin in spring, she left the flower behind, a little piece of life thriving in the woods. And as she walked down the trail, leaving her quiet winter behind, she felt a lightness in her heart, knowing that wherever she went, that summer would be with her always.